Okay, let's go. Number 1. The Book of Enoch. The year is approximately 200 BCE. You are a scribe in Judea, and the document you are copying tonight opens with a precise historical account of an event that supposedly preceded recorded history. 200 angels descended from heaven onto a mountain called Hermon in northern Israel. The text names them Semyaza, their leader; Azazel, who taught men to forge weapons and taught women to use cosmetics as instruments of seduction. They swore an oath before descending. Its full text is written out for you to read word by word. They took human women as wives. Their offspring were giants who consumed everything: the food, the livestock, eventually the people themselves. When those giants were killed, their spirits became the demons that afflict humanity. Azazel was bound in chains and buried beneath rocks in a desert called Dudael, where he waits in darkness for the final judgment. Enough geographic detail is provided that researchers have attempted to locate the site. You are copying a document that tells you where a bound angel is buried alive. This is the Book of Enoch Sefer Chanakh in Hebrew, and it came within a single surviving tradition of disappearing entirely from the earth. The text is attributed to Enoch, seventh patriarch from Adam, and the only figure in Genesis described not as dying but as simply being taken by God without explanation. What the book provides is the full account: what Enoch witnessed across the seven heavens, what the Watchers did on earth, and the cosmic judgment that awaits. Jewish scholars cited it as authoritative for centuries. Then, at the Council of Laodicea in 363 CE, it was excluded from the Christian canon. Mainstream Jewish tradition dropped it simultaneously. By 500 CE, it had vanished from the known world, surviving in its complete form only in Ethiopia, where the Orthodox Church had incorporated it into their sacred scriptures and continued reading it for the next 1,500 years, while every other tradition erased it from memory. The Dead Sea Scrolls changed that picture. In 1947, Bedouin shepherds near the Dead Sea discovered the Qumran manuscript jars, yielding the oldest surviving biblical texts ever found. Among them were fragments of the Book of Enoch in at least 7 separate copies, more copies than several canonical books that made it into the final canon. This was not fringe literature circulated by a desert sect. It was a primary document in a mainstream scholarly archive. The erasure was not routine housekeeping. It required coordinated action across religious traditions that disagreed violently on almost every other theological question. The one position they shared was that this text needed to go. The astronomical sections make the erasure stranger still. Chapters 72 through 82 describe a solar calendar encoding the precession of the equinoxes, the 25,920-year cycle produced by the slow wobble of Earth's rotational axis, which causes the apparent positions of stars to shift measurably across millennia. The Greek astronomer Hipparchus is credited with formally calculating precession around 127 BCE. The Enochian calendar sections appear to predate that calculation and encode the same cycle with a precision requiring either generations of unbroken astronomical observation or access to a source tradition that had already accumulated that data long before. Mainstream scholars treat the Book of Enoch as Maccabean period apocalyptic fiction, written between 170 and 100 BCE. The fallen angels represent foreign nations contaminating Israel. The giants represent historical enemies. The astronomical sophistication derives from Babylonian observational records absorbed during the exile. The coordinated removal is understood as multiple traditions independently concluding it raised more problems than it resolved. But Babylonian records do not contain the specific precessional framework encoded in the Enochian calendar. And the simultaneous erasure across hostile traditions was not independent convergence. It happened too fast and too completely for that. There is also Leviticus 16, which survived the editing. The Day of Atonement ritual in the Hebrew Bible requires one goat to be sent into the wilderness for Azazel. No explanation is provided. The name is used as though every reader already knows exactly who Azazel is, which they would, if the Book of Enoch were still in circulation. Someone removed the source text and forgot to remove the reference. Where is the desert of Dudael? What are the 20 other books the text lists by title as Enoch's writings, none of which have ever been found? Why does Leviticus 16 contain a name from a book the same tradition declared should not exist? And what did Azazel teach humanity that required him to be buried under rocks in chains rather than simply destroyed? The Book of Enoch was preserved by one tradition that refused to forget it. The next book was preserved by accident, hidden for 8 centuries inside the institution whose mission was to destroy it. Number 2. The Codex Gigas. The year is 1229. You are a Benedictine monk in the Podlages Monastery in Bohemia, and you are facing something worse than death. You have broken your monastic vows. The abbot has ruled that the sentence is to be walled alive, sealed inside stone, and left there. You have 1 night to produce a miracle. You sit down at your desk. The candle is lit. You begin to write. By morning, you will have produced the largest manuscript in the history of the medieval world, containing the complete Bible, the histories of Josephus, a full encyclopedia, a chronicle of Bohemia, medical treatises, a calendar of the dead, and a full-page portrait of the devil unlike anything in any other Christian manuscript in existence. The problem: that is physically impossible. The Codex Gigas is real. You can stand in front of it today at the National Library of Sweden in Stockholm. It weighs 163 pounds, stands 36 inches tall, and requires 2 people to lift. Its 310 surviving leaves came from approximately 160 donkeys. These are measurements, not estimates. The devil's portrait is exactly where the legend says full page, at the center of the book, green-skinned, arms raised. Not a warning tucked in a margin. A subject, given the same formal weight as the opening of the Gospel of Matthew. Here is what modern scribal analysis found when scholars examined the handwriting. The script is consistent throughout. Same pressure, same ink mixture, same letter spacing across all 310 leaves. A single scribe writing at full capacity, without significant interruption, would need approximately 25 to 30 years to produce a manuscript of this scope. That is not a single night. That is a lifetime. And the absence of variation, no fatigue patterns, no aging of the hand, no evidence of illness, is itself the problem. A person writing for 30 years changes. Hands change. This one did not. No one has offered an explanation for the consistency that does not require something extraordinary. The trail of owners is equally unambiguous. The Podlages Monastery, the original custodian, was wiped out by plague within decades of the manuscript's completion. The Brevnov Monastery, its next custodian, suffered documented disasters across its period of possession fires, financial collapse, institutional scandal. In 1648, during the 30 Years' War, Swedish troops looted the monastery of Brumov, where the Codex was then held. The ship transporting it to Stockholm was struck by a severe storm crossing the Baltic. The manuscript survived. Most of the cargo did not. In Stockholm, within 5 years of its arrival, fire destroyed a significant portion of the royal collection. The Codex survived that too. Every institution, every time. Then there are the 8 missing pages. At some point before the manuscript was formally catalogued, no record specifies when or by whom 8 leaves were removed. The surrounding pages retain their sequential numbering. Something was there. The surviving indexes of the Codex's contents list those pages as unknown. 8 pages. From a manuscript that survived plague, war, Baltic storms, and fire. Someone removed them deliberately. Someone who knew what they were removing decided those pages should not travel with the rest. The mainstream explanation is that the legend of a single night is a medieval morality narrative about desperation and divine intervention, the kind of story that accumulated around any extraordinary object. Catastrophes followed many institutions over centuries. Memory preserves the disasters and forgets the quiet decades. The missing pages were almost certainly liturgical content removed for reuse, a common medieval scribal practice that has nothing to do with hidden knowledge. The handwriting consistency, while noted, falls within the range of careful scribal training. Trained monks did maintain remarkable consistency across decades of practice. But the devil's portrait resists this reading. It is not a decorative element. It is not a warning. It is a subject given the same formal weight as the opening of the Gospel of Matthew. A deliberate compositional choice by the person who produced everything else. And the 8 missing pages were not removed from the liturgical sections. They were removed from a location the surviving indexes cannot fully reconstruct, which means someone understood the structure of the manuscript well enough to know exactly what they were taking. Who made that decision? When? And what was on those 8 pages that required separation from a manuscript already centered on a portrait of the devil? The Codex Gigas at least exists where you can look at it. The next book is different. It has instructions, specific operational instructions for summoning the ruler of hell. And the Vatican has classified it as the most dangerous document ever written, not the most heretical, the most dangerous. Number 3. The Grand Grimoire, France, 1521. You are a printer in Lyon, and a manuscript has arrived at your workshop with no author's name on it. The person who delivered it paid in cash, said nothing, and was gone before you finished reading the first page. You are reading it now. Section 1 describes how to cut a hazel branch at the exact moment of sunrise to produce a rod that compels obedience. Section 2 names a demon, Lucifuge Rofocale, Prime Minister of Hell, answerable only to Lucifer, Beelzebub, and Astaroth, and provides his personal seal, his preferred hours of appearance, and the exact sequence of words that force him to take visible form. Section 3 is a contract. There are blank spaces for a name and a date. At the bottom, there is a line for blood. Le Grand Grimoire, also called Le Dragon Rouge, the Red Dragon is the most formally dangerous book on this list, not by legend, by institutional classification. The Catholic Church placed it on the Index Librorum Prohibitorum, with a notation that distinguished it from every other entry. Most books on the index were listed as theologically erroneous or morally corrupting passive dangers, threats to doctrine. The Grand Grimoire was listed as an active danger. That distinction was rare. The Church did not make it for texts that were merely offensive. The full title is Le Grand Grimoire avec la Grande Clavicule de Salomon. Internal analysis places portions within the broader Solomonic grimoire tradition, suggesting the 1521 printed version drew on considerably older material. What the text provides is not philosophical or symbolic. It is operational. Day of commencement, planetary hour, specific words in specific sequence, circle dimensions in measured units, required materials, required dress, and the mechanics of the pact. The soul transfers at the moment you physically hand the signed, blood-written contract to Lucifuge Rofocale once he has been forced to appear. The book describes what to do if he refuses. It describes escalating threats up to and including the invocation of divine authority as compulsion. The system is internally consistent and designed to be used. Inquisition trial records document what happened when it was. In 1680 in Toulouse, a priest named Father Gilles was tried for possession and attempted use. His confession preserved in tribunal records describes 3 separate attempts at the compulsion ritual. The first 2 produced nothing. The third produced 6 hours he could not account for, and a house servant who refused to re-enter the room where the ritual was conducted and declined to describe what she had heard. Father Gilles was sentenced to 10 years' imprisonment. In Naples in 1703, 2 separate clergy confessed to attempting the same ritual. In Rome in 1711, a priest named Massimo Ferrante was defrocked for possession alone, not attempted use, possession. All 3 confessions were voluntary or witness-reported, consistent across decades and different countries, with no apparent coordination between the confessors. A copy of the Grand Grimoire is held today at the Bibliothèque Nationale de France in Paris. It is not listed in the general public catalogue. Access requires a formal, scholarly application with institutional affiliation. The BNF has never publicly explained why this particular manuscript receives handling protocols that other historical texts do not. The mainstream explanation for all of this is also straightforward. The Grand Grimoire is a commercial fraud, a product designed to sell to people who wanted to believe in demonic pacts. The Inquisition cases represent the psychological effects of obsessive ritual behavior and genuine belief in a system with no actual mechanism. Father Gilles' 6 missing hours are dissociation under stress. The BNF's handling protocol is institutional conservatism about historically sensitive materials, but the 2024 handling protocol was set by archivists and librarians, not theologians. The BNF has no doctrinal stake in this text. Their decision about access control was made by professionals who assessed the manuscript against current institutional policy and concluded it warranted something different. That decision exists in the present tense, not in the 16th century. What were those 6 hours that Father Gilles could not account for? What did the servant hear that she refused to describe to a tribunal? And why does a secular national archive in the 21st century treat one historical manuscript as something that requires special institutional controls? The Grand Grimoire is dangerous only if hell is real. The next book makes no such requirement. It was made by educated, methodical people who treated demonology as a technical discipline, and it is the only manual of its specific kind to survive the Church's systematic destruction campaign intact. Number 4. The Munich Manual of Demonic Magic. Southern Germany, circa 1440. You are not a madman or a wandering vagabond. You are educated. You write in clean, precise Latin. You have studied theology and natural philosophy. You are sitting at a desk, annotating diagrams with the same methodical care a physician brings to an anatomical sketch. The diagrams show geometric circles, drawn to measured specifications. The annotations name the spirit each circle is designed to contain. Here, which demon to invoke for knowledge of hidden things? Here, which for forcing a distant person to comply with your will? Here, which for causing blindness in an enemy? Here, which for raising the recently dead specifically, within 3 days of burial long enough to ask them what they know. You are not guessing. You are documenting a practice that has been tested. The book is real. It is catalogued as Codices Latini Monacenses 849 at the Bayerische Staatsbibliothek, the Bavarian State Library in Munich. It has been sitting in that collection for centuries, camouflaged among legitimate scholarly manuscripts. In 1997, Professor Richard Kiekhaefer of Northwestern University published the first modern scholarly edition under the title Forbidden Rites, a necromancer's manual of the 15th century. His conclusion, stated in the introduction, this is not a theoretical or symbolic text. It is an operational manual for someone who intends to use it. Here is what makes this manual different from every other text on this list. Every major grimoire, the Grand Grimoire, the sworn Book of Honorius, the Book of Abramelin, maintains at least a surface claim that its power derives from divine intermediaries. Angels compelled by holy names, God's authority cited to command demons. A theological framework that keeps the practitioner nominally on the right side of the divine order. This manual makes none of those claims. It invokes demons directly, by name, using their own seals. In their preferred manner. There is no angelic buffer, no theological justification. The book treats demons as what they are, entities with specific powers and specific methods of compulsion, and documents those methods in the same tone a pharmacist uses to describe drug interactions. The contents span 4 categories: divination, manipulation of living persons, physical harm at a distance, and necromancy. Each operation includes a diagram, required materials, planetary timing, and the precise words of compulsion, not just the spirit's name, but the escalating demands used if it refuses to appear. Nothing is left to interpretation. The Church conducted a systematic destruction campaign against texts of this kind between 1400 and 1500. Records from inquisitorial archives in Germany, France, and Italy document the burning of at least 23 identified demonic manuals across those 100 years. The people found with them were tried. Most were executed or imprisoned. This manuscript is the only explicitly demonic manual of its specific type, diagram complete, operationally comprehensive, written for use, rather than study known to have survived that century intact. It survived because someone hid it inside a monastery library. The institution whose mission was to destroy this kind of document unknowingly preserved it for centuries. That was not an accident. Someone placed it there deliberately, knowing exactly where it would be safe. The mainstream explanation is that this manual represents the output of a learned magic tradition that treated demonic hierarchy as natural philosophy, intellectual engagement, with forbidden structures, as a form of scholarly exploration rather than operational practice. Kiekhaefer's own work notes that many such texts were produced by literate clerics, probing the limits of forbidden knowledge as academic exercise. The diagrams and instructions are sophisticated, but may be the product of someone who wanted to understand the system, not someone who intended to use it. But Kiekhaefer also documents that inquisitors treated similar manuals as operational evidence of practice, not theory. The people burned for owning texts like this one were not burned for academic curiosity. Witnesses testified to what they had done with the knowledge. The church did not execute scholars for studying demonology. It executed people for doing what this manual describes. Who placed this manuscript in the monastery library? When? And what were the 23 destroyed manuals, the ones that did not survive, able to do that this one could not? The Munich Manual survived by hiding. The sworn Book of Honorius survived by fighting back. It declared war on the institution, trying to erase it. And it claimed the war had already been fought, that the church had already tried to kill every master of magical knowledge on earth. And the books had outlasted the killers. Number 5. The Sworn Book of Honorius. Somewhere in Europe, sometime in the 13th century. The exact location is not recorded. That is deliberate. You are one of 89 surviving masters of magical practice, and 89 of your colleagues are already dead. The Pope sent agents, not to debate or excommunicate, to kill. Tonight, in a location that will not be written down, the survivors have gathered. The decision is unanimous. Every existing book of magical knowledge will be compressed into a single volume. That volume will be copied exactly 3 times. Each copy will be sworn to be protected with the possessor's life and passed only to a single proven heir. The knowledge will survive, or the people carrying it will die trying to ensure it does. The Liber Juratus Honorii, the Sworn Book of Honorius, is a real manuscript. Surviving copies are held in the British Library and in continental archives across Europe. Its own preface tells this story, not as allegory, not as a framing device, as a direct historical account of why the book was created and under what circumstances. The book opens by explaining its own existence. That is not a common feature of medieval manuscripts. It is a statement of intent. Attributed to the legendary Honorius of Thebes, the manuscript survives in at least 5 versions spanning the 13th through 15th centuries, consistent enough to establish a stable core text beneath the scribal variations. What the sworn book promises is total. The central operation is the beatific vision, a 27-day ritual of fasting and prayer that culminates in a direct vision of God, then of heaven, then of hell. The practitioner emerges with the ability to compel any spiritual entity, angel, demon, or the recently dead to appear and speak truthfully. The instrument is the sigillum Dei, the seal of God, a complex geometrical figure provided in the text that serves as the physical mechanism of compulsion. This is not metaphor. The seal is drawn, measured, constructed. Then it is used. John Dee had a copy. Royal astrologer to Elizabeth I, mathematician, strategic advisor, a man whose professional credibility was built on ships that found their way home, not on claimed visions. His physical sigillum Dei, constructed to his specifications, survives in the British Museum today. He built it. He used it. The Inquisition's response to the Liber Juratus was different in kind from its treatment of other forbidden books. Trial records from Paris in 1323, Prague in 1385, and Cologne in 1410 document practitioners executed specifically for possessing it. In each case, the inquisitorial record notes an unusual procedural departure, where other grimoires led to book burning and, at most, imprisonment of owners. The Liber Juratus triggered immediate capital proceedings. The 1385 Prague record describes a tribunal moving directly to execution without the standard period of examination. That departure is noted by contemporary observers. It is not explained in the official record. The inquisitors knew something about this book that they did not put in writing. The book required its possessors to protect it with their lives. The church responded by making possession a capital offense. Between those two institutional positions, every person caught in the middle died. The mainstream explanation is that the founding massacre story is political mythology, a narrative designed to elevate the text's authority and justify its secrecy. Magical texts routinely claimed persecution as a marketing strategy. Scarcity and danger made forbidden books desirable. The Inquisition's urgency in these cases reflects the broader criminalization of magical practice in that period, rather than anything specific about this book. The capital proceedings were fast because the church was moving fast against all practitioners, not because this text was uniquely threatening. But the procedural departure at Prague in 1385 is not explained by a general policy of urgency. Other trials from the same period and the same inquisitors do not show the same departure from standard procedure. Something specific to this text, or to what this specific person was doing with it, triggered an immediate response. The record does not say, what. What did the 27-day ritual show practitioners that made the church willing to kill without examination? What was in the Sigillum Dei that Dee constructed and used over decades and never fully disclosed? And what exactly triggered the Prague tribunal to skip the part of the process designed to establish guilt before execution? The sworn book promises everything and documents nothing about what that everything costs. The next book is different. There is a documented case, one location, named people, specific witnesses, and a chain of consequences that ran for more than a century. Number 6. The Book of Abramelin, Boleskine House, Loch Ness, Scotland. The year is 1900. You are Aleister Crowley, the most controversial man in Britain, philosopher, mountaineer, chess master, and the individual the tabloid press will later call the wickedest man in the world, and you have been at this house for 7 months. You rise before dawn. You pray. You observe strict celibacy. You receive no visitors unless absolutely necessary. You are following, to the letter, the instructions in a 15th century manuscript written by a German Jewish scholar named Abraham of Worms, the Book of the Sacred Magic of Abramelin the Mage. The operation requires 18 months. Completed correctly, it ends in an encounter with your holy guardian angel, who then grants you authority over every demonic force summoned in preparation for the meeting. Abandoned before completion, those forces remain unbound in the space where they were called. Tonight, you are leaving, 8 months short of completion. You are going to Paris, and you will spend the rest of your life documenting what you left behind. The Book of Abramelin was written by Abraham of Worms around 1400 to 1450 CE. It exists in manuscript versions in French, German, and Hebrew. S.L. MacGregor Mathers translated it into English and published it in 1897, the version Crowley used. The book's central warning is not buried or ambiguous. It is repeated, explicit, and structurally positioned at the opening and the close of the operational instructions. The demons are summoned in advance. They wait. If the practitioner abandons the work before the angel arrives to command them, they do not leave on their own. They remain. What happened at Boleskine after Crowley left is documented in sources that have not been seriously contested. Crowley's autobiography and his private letters to his magical superior Mathers, both published and archived, record the following. His lodge master suffered a mental breakdown and required institutionalization. A workman engaged to renovate the ritual space entered violent delusions and had to be physically restrained from attacking a colleague. A neighbor's 2 children fell ill within weeks of his departure. They died. Multiple visitors to the property, people with no knowledge of the ritual, reported independently that the house felt wrong, not metaphorically, but in the way they described to Crowley directly, and several refused to return after their first visit. Crowley wrote in a letter to Mathers, dated approximately 1902, he believed he had opened a cesspool of spiritual filth at Boleskine and left it unsealed. He wrote this not to a journalist or a public audience. He wrote it to the one person he believed would understand what he meant. It is in the private correspondence, not in the public mythology. In 1970, Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin purchased Boleskine House for its association with Crowley's unfinished work. His road manager died in a car accident on the property's access road within 3 years. Page described experiences at the house he declined to specify, and eventually stopped visiting. The house burned in 2015 and again in 2019. It remains partially unrestored. Every owner. Every time. The mainstream explanation is that the chain of events at Boleskine is coincidence, organized by selective memory. Crowley was a provocateur, with strong incentives to generate legend around himself. The lodge master's breakdown reflected pre-existing instability. The children's deaths were disease. The road manager's accident was a road accident. Page's experiences were the psychological product of deliberate immersion in an environment he had primed himself to find disturbing. The fires were electrical faults. What is being presented as a causal chain is a list of ordinary tragedies attached to an extraordinary location by retrospective narrative. Extraordinary locations accumulate ordinary tragedies. That is how memory works. But the visitors who reported that the house felt wrong before they knew anything about its history had no narrative to retrospectively attach themselves to. They reported what they experienced without context. And the Abramelin text, which none of the subsequent accounts reference as their source for understanding what happened, describes exactly this outcome for exactly this circumstance. The book named The Consequence. The consequence arrived. That is either a remarkable coincidence, or it is something else. What did Crowley encounter in those 7 months that made completing the remaining 11 months impossible? What specifically did the Lodge Master's breakdown consist of? Crowley describes it but does not detail it. And why, when the house burned in 2015 and again in 2019, did both fires start in the wing built over the original ritual space? Boleskine is a single address in Scotland. The next book spread its damage across entire countries. Governments passed specific criminal legislation against it. Communities that feared it were not being irrational. They were responding to things they had personally witnessed happen to people they knew. Number 7. The 6th and 7th Books of Moses. Jamaica, 1924. You are a rural constable, and you have been called to a farm in the interior parishes. The livestock are dead. The crops on 2 adjacent fields are burned not from the outside in, but from the root upward, as if the heat came from the soil. The family that lived here left without notice, taking nothing. On the kitchen table is a book. The neighbors who called you stand at the gate and will not come past it. One tells you the book should be burned without being opened. Another tells you it should be buried at a crossroads, wrapped in salt. You look at the cover. The title reads, Das Sechste und Siebente Buch Moses, the 6th and 7th Books of Moses. This book was published in Stuttgart, Germany in 1849. You can buy it on major online retailers today, right now, for under $20. It is not rare, it is not obscure, and it was formally banned under criminal statute, with specific prosecution provisions in Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, and multiple West African nations, with possession linked to documented court proceedings for violence, property destruction, and community harm across more than 40 years of prosecution records. The book claims to contain the secret magical knowledge God gave Moses at Mount Sinai, alongside the public laws, the hidden power behind the 10 plagues, the parted Red Sea, the death of Egypt's firstborn. Whether that is true, the contents are precise. 66 seals and diagrams, each attributed to a named spirit, conjurations in Hebrew, Aramaic, and German. Instructions for compelling obedience from enemies, destroying the agricultural productivity of a specific field, causing illness in a targeted person, and summoning the dead. Unlike most grimoires that circulated among educated elites, the 6th and 7th Books of Moses was designed for mass distribution. Cheap paper. Plain language. Accessible instructions. It arrived in communities with deep folk magic traditions and connected their existing practices to biblical authority. That combination proved catastrophic. The Jamaica Archives and Records Department at Spanish Town holds prosecution records from 1900 to 1940, documenting at least 17 criminal cases in which this text was found at scenes involving violence, destroyed property, or illness clusters with no identified medical cause. The testimony in those cases is consistent and specific. A practitioner had used the book against a specific person or household, and the harm described in the relevant section of the text had arrived on the timeline the text predicted. Trinidad and Tobago documented the same. Specific practitioners, specific sections, specific outcomes verified by witness testimony. Not vague supernatural fear, but detailed accounts of named individuals harmed on the timeline the text predicted. Weimar-era German security files document requests to restrict distribution, citing rural violence in the 1920s. Denied on free expression grounds, the files exist. The mainstream explanation is that the book produced its consequences through belief rather than through any genuine occult operation. In communities where magical practice was culturally real, the book gave practitioners a tool for social control. The threat of its use was sufficient to destabilize relationships, generate psychological harm, and produce the kind of social disruption that looked, from the outside, like a curse working. No crops were destroyed by spirits. No illness arrived through bound demons. The fear did the damage. The book was a weapon of intimidation, and the prosecuted cases were the downstream effects of that intimidation. Real harm, but psychosocial harm, not supernatural. This explanation concedes the essential point. A book that generates criminal prosecutions across 3 continents, that prompts 3 separate governments to pass specific legislation against it, that produces consistent victim testimony across 50 years and multiple independent legal systems, that book is dangerous. The debate about mechanism does not change the record. The record is the record. A 19th century German publication caused legislation in Jamaica in 1898. That is not a lag time consistent with academic curiosity or isolated incidents. That is a documented pattern of harm, arriving quickly enough and seriously enough to require legislative response. What did the neighbors on that Jamaican farm actually witness that made them stand at the gate? What specific instruction in the text was applied to those crops, those animals, that family? And why does a book published in Germany in 1849 still carry criminal penalties for possession in jurisdictions it has never left? The 6th and 7th books of Moses worked through community fear and the social architecture of belief. The next book worked through something far more refined, a scientific system so precisely constructed that a king commissioned its official translation. And what it mapped as the mechanism of harm was not theology. It was astronomy. Number 8. The Picatrix. Al-Andalus, Islamic Spain, circa 1000 CE. You are a mathematician at the court of a Umayyad caliph, and your colleagues have been working on a problem that does not appear in any syllabus. They have applied the same rigorous methods they use for optics, geometry, and astronomical calculation to a different question. Whether the movements of the planets correspond not just to natural events on Earth, but to specific operations of power that a skilled practitioner could activate, sustain, and direct against a particular target. The question sounds like superstition. The methodology is not. Years of observation, recorded correspondences, tested interventions, documented outcomes. Tonight, they are writing down everything they found, all of it, 400 pages. The result is the Gayat al-Hakim, the goal of the wise. In Western tradition, it became known as the Picatrix, a title whose etymology remains disputed. It is attributed to the mathematician and astronomer Maslama al-Madriti of Madrid, circa 1000 CE, though Professor David Pingree of Brown University, who produced the definitive scholarly edition in 1986 for the Warburg Institute in London, has questioned the attribution while confirming the Bruth. Manuscript's origin in 10th to 11th century Islamic, Spain. In 1256, King Alfonso X of Castile ordered an official Spanish translation, a king, with access to every scholarly resource in his kingdom, who considered this text important enough to translate at royal expense. Here is what distinguishes the Picatrix from every other book on this list. It is not a collection of ritual fragments assembled without internal logic. It is a system, mathematically grounded, internally consistent, designed to be operated by someone with genuine competence in astronomy and natural philosophy. It explains the mechanism behind each operation, not just the procedure. Saturn governs restriction, decay, and death, and the text explains the physical theory by which Saturn's influence can be channeled through a correctly made talisman to produce those effects in a specific person, a specific community, or a specific region of land. The system is not symbolic, it is causal in its own terms, and those terms are mathematically developed. What drew the Church's attention was the scope of harm it described. The Index Librorum Prohibitorum listing from 1559 carries the same annotation as the Grand Grimoire active danger, not passive theological error. The Picatrix includes instructions for talismans designed to cause mass illness in a city, keyed to specific planetary alignments. It describes operations for destroying the agricultural productivity of a defined region through Saturn bound to specific soil, and it includes compounds documented by Pingree in his 1986 edition that contain genuinely toxic substances in real quantities sufficient to produce the effects attributed to them. This last element is critical. The Picatrix is not operating solely through ritual belief. Parts of what it describes as magical operation are also chemistry. The compounds for causing illness include real toxins, administrable through contact or ingestion. A reader sophisticated enough to separate the astronomical framework from the material pharmacology could use the second independently of the first. Authorities who understood the text fully enough to recognize this were looking at something that operated on multiple levels simultaneously. That is a different kind of danger than theology. The book's influence on Renaissance natural philosophy is documented. Marsilio Ficino's De Vita from 1489 contains direct textual borrowings from the Picatrix. Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy itself, placed on the index, references its framework throughout. The church banned it while the defining intellects of the Renaissance kept reading it. John Dee owned a copy. The mainstream explanation is that the Picatrix's danger was entirely perceived. Its astrological framework was believed to be operational but had no actual causal mechanism. The toxic compounds were real, but that pharmacological knowledge existed elsewhere. A practitioner who wanted to poison someone didn't need 400 pages of planetary theory to do it. But Pingree spent years of his professional life producing a critical edition of a text he considered trivially fraudulent. Alfonso X did not commission translations of harmless books, and the convergence of Ficino, Pico, and Agrippa on this specific text, out of every available source, suggests they found something in it that other sources did not contain. What were the original testing protocols that produced the correspondence tables? What specific operations did Alfonso X's court find sufficiently valuable to translate officially? And why did 3 of the most rigorous intellects of the Renaissance choose this particular book as their primary operational source when other texts were available? The Picatrix worked through science or through something that looked enough like science to attract scientists. The next book required no science at all. It required only a printing press and a judge willing to act on what it said. Number 9. The Malleus Maleficarum, Strasbourg, 1487. You are Heinrich Kramer, Dominican Inquisitor, and you are holding the first printed copies of your book. The title is The Hammer of Witches, Malleus Maleficarum. 3 parts. Part 1 establishes that witches are real, that denying their existence is heresy, and that any judge who declines to prosecute them on insufficient evidence is himself complicit. Part 2 describes how to identify witches by marks on their bodies, by behavioral signs, by the testimony of their neighbors. Part 3 describes, in precise procedural detail, how to question a suspected witch, how to apply torture to produce confession, how to use those confessions to generate accusations against further suspects, and how to execute the convicted. At the front of this book you have placed a papal bull issued by Innocent VIII in 1484. The bull addressed witchcraft in general terms. You have written a preface suggesting it constitutes a specific endorsement of your methods. It does not. The endorsement is yours alone. You have also attached a faculty approval from the theologians of Cologne University. They declined to provide it. You have forged their signatures. Within 30 years, this book will be on the desk of every judge in the Holy Roman Empire. Between 1487 and 1750, between 40,000 and 60,000 people were executed using the Malleus Maleficarum as legal authority. That figure comes from Professor Brian Levack of the University of Edinburgh, whose 1987 study The Witch Hunt in Early Modern Europe remains the standard scholarly reference on the execution statistics. Other historians, including Gustav Henningsen, place the figure higher. The majority of those killed were women over 40 in rural communities. They were convicted on confessions extracted under torture and on the testimony of neighbors who had been taught by the Malleus to interpret ordinary misfortune as evidence. The cascading accusation structure in Part 3 was not a flaw in the design, it was the design. Each convicted person named others. Those others were arrested and tortured into naming more. Entire villages were destroyed through chains of accusation that the book had engineered. The Malleus was printed on the Gutenberg press. 35 documented editions between 1487 and 1600. It reached courts in regions that had conducted no witch trials before its arrival and provided them the procedural framework to begin. Here is what makes the Malleus specifically more dangerous than every other book on this list. The Catholic Church reviewed it and condemned it. 3 years after publication, the Cologne Faculty of Theology formally refused endorsement, finding it theologically unsound and legally dubious. They discovered that the signatures Kramer had attached were forged. A condemnation was issued. The book kept being printed, kept being purchased, kept being used by secular courts for the next 150 years. because the Malleus had crossed from ecclesiastical into civil law. Secular judges, mayors, magistrates, city councils were using it as a legal manual. No papal condemnation could reach them. The Church had criminalized witchcraft, and then lost control of the instrument it had created. The book outlived its author, its endorsers, and the institution that condemned it, and kept killing for more than 2 centuries. The mainstream explanation is that the Malleus reflected a genuine cultural anxiety of its time, and that Kramer was an extreme product of a broader institutional pathology rather than its singular cause. Witch trials predated it and persisted where it had limited circulation. The book amplified an existing tendency. It did not create it. This is probably accurate, and it is the most disturbing fact on this list. The Malleus worked not because it opened a portal or bound a demon or aligned a talisman with a planetary hour. It worked because it gave frightened people institutional permission to act on their worst instincts and call it justice. No supernatural mechanism required. Just a printing press, a set of forged endorsements, and the willingness of enough authorities to act as though what they held was legitimate. The forged signatures are still in the early editions, sitting there, at the front of a document that killed tens of thousands. Kramer knew what he was doing when he forged them. What stopped the Cologne theologians from publicly pursuing Kramer across courts already using his book? And what does it tell us about dangerous knowledge, that the deadliest text on this list required no ancient wisdom, no forbidden ritual, no secret at all, only a press and the willingness to lie about permission? The Malleus killed through authority borrowed from an institution that never gave it. The last book on this list operates through something more intimate and more lasting. It holds a warning that an angel delivered to the most capable man in Elizabethan England, and it still hasn't finished speaking. Number 10. The Book of Soyga, London, 1582. You are John D. Royal Astrologer to Elizabeth I, the mathematician who charted England's navigational routes, who helped design the naval strategy that faced the Spanish Armada, who held a royal appointment based on demonstrated expertise in mathematics, astronomy, and cryptography. You are holding a book you cannot read, not because it is in a foreign language, because it is in no recognizable system. The bulk of the text is organized into 36 tables, each one a dense grid of letters that resists every method of analysis you know. You understand cipher, you understand constructed language. You understand mathematical sequence. None of that has been sufficient. Tonight you have asked your scryer, Edward Kelly, to put the question to the angel Uriel. Kelly enters trance. D holds his pen. When Kelly speaks, he reports the answer. The tables can only be read by angels, and anyone who possesses this book will die within 2 and 30 months. The Book of Soyga is real. Its full title page reads, Aldaraya Siv, Soyga Vokor, I am called Aldaraya, or Soyga. The book is narrating itself. 2 manuscript copies survive, one at the British Library in London, one at the Bodleian Library in Oxford. Both copies have been verified by independent paleographic analysis as 16th century manuscripts. The origin of the text before Dee's possession of it is entirely unknown. No author, no date of composition, no documented provenance before the 1580s. The book appeared in Dee's collection without explanation. It has never been explained since. Dee's diary entry from March 1582 records the consultation with Uriel in full. The diaries are preserved in the British Library and have been published in full scholarly edition. The angel's response, 2 and 30 months, death is transcribed in Dee's own handwriting in the margin beside the session record. Not added later. Not reported secondhand. Written in real time, during the session, by a man whose professional credibility rested on precision and whose private records were not intended for any audience. In 1994, Jim Reeds, a mathematician and cryptanalyst at AT&T Bell Laboratories, began a sustained computational analysis of the 36 tables. His working paper, circulated in 1994 and revised through 2006, documents what he found. The tables are not random. They are algorithmically generated through a keyword cipher, and the keyword is Adam. That is not a guess. It is a demonstrated mathematical result from one of the leading cryptanalytic research institutions in the world. The decoded portions, a fraction of the total table content, contain names of spirits, invocational sequences, and instructions written in a magical language with structural features shared with the Enochian system Dee later developed through his continued angel communications. The full decoding of all 36 tables remains incomplete, as of today. What Reeds found when decoding was possible: a coherent system, internal grammar, consistent vocabulary, functional structure, not noise, and not fraud. A Bell Laboratories mathematician published findings on a 16th century magical manuscript not because the content aligned with his worldview, but because the mathematics required an honest answer. The mathematics said, "Someone made this deliberately, with care, in a language that is not accidental." John Dee died in 1608, roughly 26 years after acquiring the book. The angel's warning was 2 and 30 months. Dee outlived that window by more than 2 decades. Either the warning was inaccurate, or the trigger was not possession but successful reading. Dee never successfully decoded the tables. He kept the book anyway. He never told anyone what he thought was in it. The Book of Soyga is in the British Library today. It is not restricted. It is not behind special access protocols. You can walk into the reading room at St. Pancras Road, submit a standard manuscript request form, and the box will arrive at your desk within the hour. The 36 tables will be exactly as Dee found them in 1582, exactly as Reeds found them in 1994, still not fully decoded. Still waiting for something. These 10 books span from ancient Judea to a London reading room open today. Each was banned not for ideas but for what happened when people engaged with it: the madness, the disasters, the 60,000 executions, the house that keeps burning, the tables that still will not decode. Across 1,000 years and a dozen cultures, everyone who encountered these books reached the same conclusion: some things should not be read. If this list kept you watching until now, subscribe, there are more of these waiting. Like the video if you think something belongs on this list that we missed, and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Because somehow, this kind of video always seems to be watched after midnight.